Welcome back to the Global Business Report on Arise News. All eyes on the Anambra elections, which so far has been declared inconclusive by INEC. So far, the leading candidate, or based on results that have been released from INEC, is Professor Chukwudo Soludo, who, of course, is a former central bank governor of Nigeria and a former economic advisor to former President Obasanjo. It throws up the question of whether or not technocrats in leadership positions are the way to go in Nigeria. Joining us to discuss that, plus the state of the states, is Omotola Abimbola, an investment analyst at Chapel Hill, Denham, who is with us right now. Omotola, good morning to you. Thank you so much for joining us. So we're waiting to see what the full results are from for the Anambra elections. There's another supplementary election, I believe, tomorrow. But I guess with Charles Soludo in the lead, again, former central bank governor, former special advisor, economic advisor to former President Obasanjo, professor of economics, I mean, had a hand in putting NIBS together. What do you make of the whole debate of technocrats in leadership positions in Nigeria, Tola?
Well, good morning and thanks for having me. I mean, to answer your question, I think it's a very, very important thing. Because I mean, politics is very, very central to any country's development or even improvement in their social economy. So it's very, very important for the country to always put its best foot forward when it comes to politics. And when you look at the case of Anambra, for instance, I think they do have it lucky because the leading front runners in the race. Very strong individuals with strong experience in the private sector and also in the public sector, operating independently, and they have a very solid track record. So, having such, technocrats, taking charge of affairs, even being responsible for a particular government ministry, agency, or parastatal, is very, very important because it's going to bring the efficiency of the private sector, is going to bring it to bear in the administration, of the public sector. But I mean, the elections are still, they're still ongoing, and we don't have a winner yet. But I do believe that, whoever comes out victorious in the race, we bode well for the state over the short to medium term.
All right, thanks for that. I mean, yeah, current governor, Willie Obiano, prior governor to him, Peter Obi, all private sector technocrats there. Let's take a look at figures here from budget, particularly the fiscal 2021 fiscal performance ranking. You can see Anambra there in third place, behind Rivers and Ebonyi. What do you make of, I guess, the fiscal structure of Anambra State in terms of how well it's performed? I think let's take a look at another chart. So I think we should look at the growth there it is, yeah. So 5-year trend, internally generated revenue, FAC allocations also growing. To the right there, we've got year-on-year growth in IGR, capital expenditure. Is this the model for other states, Tola?
Well, I do believe that Anambra is one of the few lucky states in Nigeria, when it comes to fiscal viability, because if you look at their fiscal metrics across board, they are actually amongst, one of the best in the country. And they have, we have to thank, all the previous, including, the last, governor who built a legacy of, fiscal conservatism in the state, which led to a build-up of significant, savings, for the state and successive administrations as well. I think they've done quite well in trying to build on that and make sure that the state, is very, very viable when it comes to its fiscal matrix. But looking more specifically to the growth in the IGR of the state, I think it's quite interesting to note, that the IGR for the state has been growing, at double digits, at least prior to 2020, when we had the COVID, crisis, that in fact, weighed on the fiscal numbers of not just the subnational entities alone, but even the central government. You would say that, FAC allocation to the entire federation, year 2020, due to the impact of, COVID on her revenue, of the federation, as well as the non revenue as well. But thanks to the fact that the state has a very solid high jihad base, I mean they were able to partly offset that decline, in the park revenue, to ensure that they continue to pay salaries and also spend a very decent amount on capital expenditure as well. So if you look at the contribution of high jihad to total revenue, for instance, 34%, which is decent. But I would say that there is still, a very big room for them to improve. Because if you look at, one of the, if you look at, the states in Nigeria with perhaps, not even perhaps, with, undoubtedly the best fiscal metrics in the country, and that's Lagos State. If you look at their high GR profile, it is currently, above 70% of the total revenue. So Anambra is just about half of that, which shows that I see a very big delta, for them. And to do that with more, improving tax administration, making it easy for people to do business in the state, and generally also improving security, as well. And I think those things will be very, very central in making sure that the state can improve on its IGR and totally become independent, similar to what we have in Lagos State today.
Great stuff, Tola. There was a second chart that we had there, the spending priorities. There it is. So that's in the middle, the second graph there with about 59% or so going to 59.09% going to capital expenditure, and then only for 40.91 going to operating expenses. Tola, how many other states can get there to where they are spending more on capital expenditure versus operating expenses, or are they in too deep of a hole?
Well, every state has, but as of today, only very few states, have gotten to that level where they are spending more on capital expenditure than what they are spending on operating expenses, which is essentially, paying salaries and a few. And I do believe that, for every state in the federation today, it's very, very important, that we get to the level where we are spending, more of our, revenue, in capital expenditure than what we do on operating expenditure. We all know the numbers. Today, it is believed that for Nigeria to curb its massive infrastructure gap, we do need to be spending about $100 billion every year on infrastructure. Where is that money going to come from? Definitely is not going to come from the central government, because if you look at the central government, it's heavily burdened. The entire federal government expenditure in Nigeria today is about $34 billion, per annum. And out of that, they are spending more than 70% on operating expenditure alone. And out of the 30% that they are reserved for capital expenses, the real core, capital expenditure there, which goes into fixing roads, building bridges, building rail lines, they are just less than 20% of the total capital of total expenditure outlay for a year. So definitely, the central government, can only do very little in trying to cover that infrastructure gap, and time is not waiting for anybody. So for us to get to a level, where we are at least spending $50 billion, every year on capital expenditure, we need to see the state, begin to do a lot more in capital expenditure. And how would they do that? Number one, they need to find a way to grow the pie, that is, grow their revenue base. And when they're able to grow their revenue base, that would improve, their capacity to actually borrow more money to fix this expenditure. And beyond just having the federal government and the state government, spend money on fixing infrastructure, we also need to see, the both of them, engagement with the private sector through PPP projects, to ensure that we have more private sector financing in infrastructure, in Nigeria.
Thank you so much for that, Tola. There's one more chart. We have to talk about debt. We can't talk about states without talking about debt. Now, Anambra does have, and for our viewers, again, we're looking at, fiscal structure for Anambra State here compared to others. You can see that, look at in the middle there, debt growth 2016 to 2020, 408% increase in debt there. The chart to the right, you can see from 2016 through to 2020, from about 19 billion or so up to 101, 101 billion. Tola, how can states manage the debt burden? That's been something that we've talked a lot about, even at the federal level for Nigeria. But for states, how do you see it?
Well, when you're looking at that, it's not just important to look at the absolute figure alone. That is looking at the quantum of the debt alone. It's also very important for you to look at the debt relative to the revenue of the state and relative to their GDP or their earnings potential. So, for instance, if you look at the most if you're looking at the quantum of debt alone in Nigeria today, Lagos State has the highest debt level amongst all the subnationals in the country. But in terms of their capacity to actually borrow and their debt burden, if you look at it relative to their revenue, relative, to the GDP of the state, it shows that they still have, very, very healthy balance sheet and very decent capacity to continue to borrow and continue to spend more on infrastructure. So for Anambra State, it's not just important to look at, just the quantum of debt alone, but look at it relative, to their revenue and to GDP. And when you do that, it still shows that, the state still has very, very decent level of debt. However, it's also very important, for states going forward to engage, in very good borrowing practices, find ways to reduce, your short-term obligations, borrow more long-term, borrow at attractive level of interest rates, and don't borrow for any project, borrow only for projects that you do know, can self-finance and has, a very, very important, contribution to the state. I think these are the very, very basic level, of debt management practices necessary, for every state to remain very sustainable, going forward.
Great stuff. Let's go back to that first image that we had, the fiscal structure rankings there. You mentioned Lagos, actually before this chart, the very first one. Yeah, there it is. Now, Tola, what would it take for, I guess, an Anambra or other states to rival Lagos as the commercial capital of the country in terms of attracting foreign direct investments and just other competitive parameters? Is it more independence?
That is very important, but trying to, reach the height of Lagos today, it won't be a walk in the park. When you consider that Lagos actually has a geographical advantage, being, a major port city in the country, having a very, long coastline, and also having very decent level of infrastructure. But beyond that, we also need to see, an improvement in governance level across all the states. I've mentioned, that when you look at IGR to revenue ratio, for instance, Lagos State has the highest in the country, at more than 70%. And most of the other states in the country today, including Anambra, they are still falling short of that significantly. So there are lessons to learn, in the tax administration practices of Lagos State, in the way also to attract investors to it, and also in the way that the state also manages its debt. But altogether, I do believe that subnationals in Nigeria generally they have a long way to go, when it comes to, trying to become more independent, of federation of federal government subventions. If you look at, the biggest source of revenue for states today, which is payee tax, the total size of the payee tax being collected, nationwide today is less than the value-added tax rate being collected by the federal government. Meanwhile, the VAT rate is just about 7.5%. Meanwhile, payee tax can get up to 20%. So in terms of the scope and the tax base and the tax net,
all right,
states actually have enough. They have enough to ride on currently, but they just need to do a lot more in trying to ensure that all the potentials available to them are being fully optimized.
Great stuff. Great stuff. Omotola Abimbola, investment analyst with Chapel Hill Denham. Thank you so much for talking to us about the fiscal stability of Anambra State and other states across Nigeria. Appreciate your time.